Very delighted to welcome you all today. As you know, as already announced, that today we have our dear and dear friend Christopher Jaffrelot, who is going to talk about a very vital, important topic, which is concerned with lives of millions in India today. And the topic is Dalits, reservations, and privatization in today's India. And Christopher is going to take us through his presentation, and we are going to, if you have any questions, any clarification to be sought, you can write in the Facebook comment box that is there. And actually, I didn't want to introduce Christopher because a lot of people know him. I don't want to waste his time, but just a word, as you know, that he's always ready to come and talk on issues which are very close to his heart. And he has been doing it for like since he first came to India. And he has friends all over the country, and wherever he finds an opportunity to interact with the activists, or the students, the scholars, anywhere, he's tirelessly trying to reach out to the people. So that's something very remarkable about Christopher. And he is today going to deliver a very important talk. And joining with us is also Priyadarshi today, and he will take up the questions and answer, and we will see how it goes. So welcome, Christopher. Jai Bhim, and welcome, Christopher.
Thank you, Mangesh. And indeed, today the talk that I'm going to give is very close to my heart. And I have had to do some research, additional research, to get some additional data. And I'm very pleased to share this data with you. So let me first share the screen and make sure that you can see this PowerPoint presentation that will indeed be on Dalits reservations and privatizations in today's India, but with some historical perspective. And I would like to dedicate this presentation to Anand Teltumde, who is still in jail, who is still someone badly affected by the present dispensation, and that we do not forget, and someone who still read and do not forget. Reservations for Dalits. I will focus on reservations for Dalits. I will not mention reservations for others in this presentation, but in the Q&A, we may look at OBCs and STs if you want. But reservations for Dalit have probably been one of the most significant achievements of India in terms of equality promotion, in terms of emancipation. The emancipatory power of reservations is unmatchable. And in the rest of the world, no experience of that kind has never been completed. It's a long story. It is the legacy of the British Raj. If we had the time, we would go back to the 19th century when for the first time reservations took place in British India. But it's also the legacy of Indian players, actors, statesmen, including the Madras Presidency-based Justice Party, including Sahu Maharaj, and of course Babasaheb Ambedkar. And I wanted to find a photograph um, referring to this historical perspective, and I found this interesting photograph with Babasaheb Ambedkar and the Maharaja of Kolhapur, who was the descendant of Sahu Maharaj, to show the connection. This Maharaja, as most of you know, helped Babasaheb to go to foreign countries for his studies. So a long story harking back to the British Raj, but of course, a man was responsible for this achievement. And again, Babasaheb Ambedkar is the person who mattered the most in this story. And I have reproduced here this photograph that I like a lot because it shows Babasaheb Ambedkar as the statesman who worked first in the British Council in New Delhi, and then in the Constituent Assembly as head of the drafting committee, and then, of course, as law minister. As early as the 40s, the 1940s, Babasaheb Ambedkar considered that one of his achievements as member of the Viceroy Council was the introduction of a reservation, of a quota of 8.33% of the post of the national administration, which were reserved for scheduled caste. He wanted to do that at the national level to emulate what had been already achieved at the provincial level in Madras presidency. And he did other things, but I don't want to spend too much time on the history. Of course, this was enshrined, reservations were enshrined in the Constitution of India, and we see Babasaheb Ambedkar handing over a copy of the Constitution to Rajendra Prasad, who was at the helm of the Constituent Assembly and who was to become the first president of the Republic on this photograph. This constitution made also these reservations proportional to the demographic weight of the Dalit. So there is an history behind. Now, today, and that's what I'd like to focus upon, we can see that reservations have become more systematic. And the first part of my presentation will focus on the systematization of reservations over the last few decades. But, and that will be my second part, paradoxically, it has divided Dalits along class lines as well as along Jati lines. And these divisions have been exploited by BJP and other parties. But last and not least, that will be my third part, today reservations are also undermined by other factors, including the shrinking of the state. And the shrinking of the state goes hand in hand with privatization plans of the government that have just been announced. So these three parts will, I hope, cover the ground, what was announced in the title. A success story, yes. First, because quotas have been fulfilled gradually. Second, because reservations got diversified. Well, if you look at the reservation quotas year after year, you realize that for many decades, the quotas were not at all fulfilled, at least in the central administrative services. A meager 0.5% of the quotas in class 1 was there in 1953. And gradually, not only class 4, but gradually class 3 by 1994, and then class 2 by 2003, and finally class 1 by 2015 were fulfilled. I do not have data after 2015. I would be happy to receive information from those who know. Some experts may have access to this data, but the point is that over the course of time, reservations finally were fulfilled. That's the main point. And it's not only true of central government services, it's also true of other apparatus or branches of the state, something you will find in the social welfare statistics handbooks of the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. I don't want to spend too much time on too many figures. What is important is to look at another aspect of the state apparatus, the public sector, the public enterprises, the public undertakings. because that is another very important location for jobs. And here again, you see the percentage of reservations jumping in the 70s to reach almost 17%, which is something that continued after 2004. The same report I have just mentioned give an interesting graph showing that reservations for SCs in the central public sector enterprises grew from 14.6% in 2003 or 2004 to 18% between 2013-2014. So all the indicators show the same thing. Gradually, quotas have been fulfilled, even if initially they were not. Why? Well, you may say that this is a reflection of the education that Dalits have acquired gradually. By the way, implementing one of the mottos of Babasaheb Ambedkar again, educate. Educate was the first motto he had with organize and mobilize. The literacy rate of Dalits has constantly improved over the last few decades to reach now 66.1%. The gap between the literacy rate of scheduled caste and the national average has never been so small. The national average is only 73%. So that's one explanation. Another explanation, of course, is the fact that there were political mobilizations. And one of the expressions of this political mobilization was the rise of BSP. BSP in the 90s gained momentum and crossed the 5% vote share in 2004, 2009 were the peak. That's something nobody could ignore. Mainstream parties and their governments were under the pressure of the BSP, and they were under the pressure of the making of a Dalit vote. They could not ignore that. So these are important explanations, of course, that you need to somewhat regionalize. Uttar Pradesh was definitely the place where BSP made the strongest impact. 27.4% of the voters supported BSP in 2009. But Punjab, Haryana sometimes, Madhya Pradesh in the past have all been strongholds to some extent, Chhattisgarh as well, of BSP. So that's the other explanation, the making of a Dalit vote that nobody could ignore. And we have to keep this in mind, and I will return to that when we look at where are the Dalit voters today, and how are they now much more divided. Not only quotas were fulfilled, but interesting developments took place for the reasons I have just noticed, especially the making of a Dalit vote. One, out of the 20% procurement quota reserved for the micro, small, and medium enterprises, 4% were set aside for Dalit-run enterprises by the UPA government in 2012. It would be very interesting, by the way, to revisit the achievements of the UPA governments in terms of reservations. This is also the moment when Arjun Singh, well, soon before, a little bit before, Arjun Singh introduced what was known as Mandal 2, but we have no time to go into this. And secondly, reservations in promotion had been introduced before to ensure adequate representation of Dalits in every level of administration. And that was under Vajpayee. The 2002 amendment constitutional amendment, the 85th constitutional amendment, granted reservations in promotions along with consequential seniority. So that was another factor in the systematization of reservations in the 2000s. The paradox is, and that's now part 2 that begins, the paradox is that these reservations have created divisions. And I'm doing some research with Kalayara Saran, my co-author of many articles on this subject, that shows that some Dalit jatis have benefited more than others from reservations. I can't look at all the cases, but I will focus on the Jatavs in Uttar Pradesh, where they represent roughly half of the scheduled caste, and where they have become, if you want, dominant Dalit, in the sense that they are better represented in the state assembly, in the universities, in the public sector, and you can say because of reservations. They cornered most of these reservations. It's very clear in terms of education. These are data we, Kalia Rasan and myself, found in the India Human Development Survey. Again, a source that is independent and reliable, but that is very old now because the last round was in 2011, 2012. So of course, these are 10 years old data. We can't help really, we have to do with what we have. But these data are interesting in the sense that they show that 10 years ago already, those who were known as chamars in this IHDS, Jatav would be more appropriate. These people had many more graduates than passes, than dobbies. Education worked in their favor. Reservations in the public sector worked in their favor too. When you look at the salariate, those who have a salaried jobs, again, Jatavs are ahead. 10%, more than 10% of them are with a salaried job. It's twice more than dobbies, it's almost twice more than passes, and it's more than most of the OBC caste. If you look at Telis, Kushwa, Nishad, Kurmis, Yadavs are the only ones with a better representation. So they could also dominate in terms of access to reservations in the public sector. And third, they were also overrepresented in the State Assembly of Uttar Pradesh. These data come from a research I'm doing with Gilles Vernier's at Ashoka University. It's part of a joint project that we have at Ashoka University and Sciences Po. We have created a virtual lab to study the social profile of India's national and provincial elected representatives, MPs and MLAs. And MLAs of Uttar Pradesh, when the BSP did well in 2007, for instance, when they got a majority, these MLAs were mostly coming from the Jatavs among the SCs in reserve seats. So the overrepresentation of Jatavs in the assembly compared to Katiks, compared to Pasis, compared to others, show that BSP was seen as a Jatav party. And the Jatavs were dominant politically in relative terms when BSP did well. So small Dalit groups, smaller and you can say poor Dalit jatis accused the Jatovs of monopolizing access to reservations and to power when the BSP was in office. And this resentment was very clearly exploited by BJP in Uttar Pradesh. In the last elections, the BSP continued to give a large number of tickets to Jatovs. They nominated 20% of their candidates coming from the Jatovs, whereas BJP nominated only 5% of Jatovs, but 7.7% of passes and 9% of other SCs. Not only that helped, but the resentment of smaller caste groups vis-a-vis BSP also explains why. The BSP-SP, they were in a coalition, candidates got 75% of the Jatav vote, but only 42% of the other SCs, who were in fact as many as the Jatavs. These other SCs supported BJP more than BSP and SP. So you have there a very interesting explanation for the reason why BJP did so well among Dalit voters in 2019. Never before had BJP got so many SC votes. 33.5% of Dalits voted for BJP in 2019. There were only 24% 5 years before and only 12% in 2009, which shows that the BJP was in a position to get Dalit voters, but Dalit voters coming from non-dominant Dalit jatis, as if non-dominant Dalit jatis join hands against the Jatav-supported BSP and others, because that's at a pan-Indian level, that's a national story. Very interestingly also, these Dalits who voted for BJP were particularly poor. Never before had the poor Dalits supported BJP so much. 34% of the poor Dalits supported BJP in 2019. So my hypothesis is that the poor Dalits who supported the BJP in 2019 belong to the small non-dominant jatis, which are usually less affluent and which had been resentful. We were resenting the way Jatavs had become dominant by cornering most of the reservations. We could reproduce this explanation by looking at other states. I will not do it, but of course, Maharashtra is a case in point. In Maharashtra also, you see Mahars supporting RPIs would be better. When in fact, BJP got, and Shiv Sena, got supporters among other SCs, including Mangs and Shambars. That is something that has to do again with divisions of Dalits along class lines. It's very interesting to see that the Mahars of Maharashtra and among them Buddhists are more affluent, and in fact have also a growth rate of their wealth that is much higher. If you compare what they earned in 2004 and 2011, you see a real gap, I mean, a real jump, 200%, more than 200% of increase in their revenue. And Mang and Matangs and Shambars lag behind. And it's also due to, of course, occupation. They are overrepresented among Dalits in the salaried professions. Same story, reservations, and not only large numbers in reservations, but also better responsibilities. They are higher in the hierarchy of the bureaucracy usually. So the conclusion of part 2, and that's something that takes me back to Ambedkar, is that instead of uniting the Dalits politically, reservations have contributed to divide them, in the sense that some groups which were lagging behind resented the way others gained more from the reservations. And this is taking us back to what Ambedkar called graded inequality, when he regretted that the Dalits were reproducing the graded inequality syndrome inherent in the caste system. And he said in a very moving speech, this caste system among the untouchables has given rise to mutual rivalry and to jealousy, and it has made common action impossible. He was very desperate at that time. Well, politically at least, in terms of the voting pattern that we see in 2019, he was right. I mean, he was still right, in spite of regretting the fact that he was right. What is also important to note is the fact that reservations have contributed to divide some Jatis along class lines in terms of political behavior. I've just published a long article based on the data that the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, CSDS, and Lognity have collected. These data show that the richer Jata voters were, the more BJP oriented they were too. The poor Jatav and Chamars of Uttar Pradesh voted massively for the SP-BSP coalition. The rich Jatav and Chamars of Uttar Pradesh supported BJP, and there is a linear relation. The richer you are, the more BJP oriented you also are among the Jatavs of Uttar Pradesh. So this is a division that is based on class, but of course that has something to do with reservations too, because those who have succeeded in life among Jatavs and Chamars of Uttar Pradesh are mostly those who have benefited from reservations. So this is the irony of reservations. They have generated divisions among Dalits along caste lines and class lines at the wrong time. At the wrong time because reservations are under attack, and therefore to defend them, unity would be necessary. And the kind of pressure that was there when BSP was on the rise this unity would be necessary again for defending reservations which are under attack, for many reasons. The first reason is that in 2018, a reservation quota, a new quota was introduced, and I quote an article we have co-authored with Kalai Arasaran that says, the constitutional amendment by the Modi government in order to introduce a 10% quota for the poor within the general category looks like an attempt 5 months before general elections at wooing upper caste voters longing for the jobs that were to be part of Achedin. This is at odds, and this is the important sentence, This is at odds with the initial rationale of India's positive discrimination programs, which were intended to make up for past oppression and not as an employment scheme. Reservations are not supposed to give jobs. Reservations are supposed to give jobs to those who have suffered from centuries of oppression, discrimination, and suffer from the stigma. So that was the first attack that took place at the national level. Another one took place at the state level in Uttar Pradesh. After Yogi Adityanath took over as chief minister, you saw a dilution of the reservation programs. You see that in the way many posts remain vacant. Out of the 3,307 posts of police inspectors that are reserved for the scheduled caste, only 2,486 have been filled, for instance. The rest remain vacant because candidates were not considered as competent enough. Not a single platoon commander was appointed from SC/ST category out of the 210 seats. Fire service class 2 officers at 20 out of 97 posts reserved for SCs, and only one was appointed and none from STs. And in parallel, the government of Yogi Adityanath included 17 OBC caste groups in 2019, early 2019, into the list of the scheduled caste. And of course, that would force Dalits to compete with better educated groups for acceding to reservations. The Allahabad High Court stayed this in September 2019, and therefore the order was withdrawn, but it showed the intention. All this is coming from an article I co-authored with Aider Abbas Rizvi, and the details are easy to get through this link. Uttar Pradesh was one of the states where reservations have been under attack after 2017. But there are more structural issues at stake. It's not only the central government of today, it's not only some state governments of today, it's also a long-term trend that shows that the state is shrinking, that the number of jobs in the public sector is diminishing gradually. And you can see that it began before 2014. And not only the number of jobs in the central public sector enterprises is diminishing, but you see a lot of people not on the payroll permanently of the state, but with a contract. So the state is subcontracting jobs it used to do by itself to private contractors, to private enterprises, and therefore the state is shrinking also in that respect. That is something that needs to be combined to another factor. The state is also shrinking because many posts remain vacant, and the number of posts that were vacant, which were vacant in 2014, was very high. 7.5 lakh posts were vacant at that time. And again, I could not find the data post 2014, but if anybody can make this data available, that would be of great help. Well, what was fascinating for me was the rise of these vacancies. Really a tremendous increase from 5.5 lakh to 7.5 lakh between 2006 and 2014. So the state is shrinking for many reasons, including the number of vacancies that is increasing. So when you look at the impact of the shrinking of the state on reservations, then you see that certainly the percentages is increasing. And on this table, you see that the percentage of scheduled caste in the central government services in India has increased. The percentage was 16.52 in 2002 and 17.30 in 2012. It has increased. But the number of people employed has diminished, has decreased from 5.40 lakh to 4.55 lakh. Not a small decline. 1 lakh has gone almost. That's for these central government services. If you look at the central public sector enterprises, you will see a similar development almost. The percentage has significantly increased from 14.6% in 2003-2004 to 18.14% in 2013-2014, but the number has stagnated and in fact diminished. If you look at the peak was in 2008-2009, and today, in 2013-2014, we are at 14.86 lakh, which is really a decline, a significant decline. Again, data are not available after this 2013-2014 year, but it would be very interesting to update this data. Now, one more step may be made by the government, because very recently, the finance minister, Dalits Reservations, while she was announcing the fifth and last tranche of the second COVID crisis-related stimulus package, told that privatization would now be the order of the day. It was already in the pipeline. In fact, when she presented the 2020-2021 budget in February, she had already announced that Air India would be privatized, something that is long overdue from their point of view. And also some disinvestment would take place in institutions like the Life Insurance Corporation, a huge company. But of course, what was in the pipeline needs now to be accelerated. The privatization plans have to be accelerated because the Indian government needs money. The fiscal deficit is increasing because of the crisis, and therefore privatizations are not only a structural policy, they are also needed for money, for quick money. So that's why Mrs. Sitharaman has presented a new public sector enterprise policy, in the framework of which a list of strategic sectors will be notified, and in these sectors, only 4 public sector enterprises will be allowed. The rest will either merge with other companies or be privatized. That's the future. Well, if privatization is the future, what about reservations in the private sector? Of course, this question is not new, because the shrinking of the public sector is not new. And therefore, as early as 2005 and 6, the Manmohan Singh government has reflected upon this, and UPA 1 and UPA 2 have invited the private sector to introduce reservations one way or the other. Some of the ministers were more interested than others in this. The Manmohan Singh government was very much divided, but the invitation was formulated. What was the response? Well, the chambers of commerce and industry have responded that they would prefer to help in a different way, not via reservations. What ways have they imagined? Well, we knew recently about them when a question was asked in the Rajya Sabha. In fact, there were two questions. The first one was whether it is a fact that government is holding deliberations on affirmative action in the private sector. And secondly, if so, what are the details outlining the proposals for affirmative action and the initiatives taken so far by the private sector? Interestingly, the words used there are affirmative action, the American parlance, when in India, the usual formula was positive discrimination, formula I prefer myself. Well, the response is interesting. That was January last year, so it's rather recent feedback. Let me read the response by the Minister of State in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. A coordination committee for affirmative action for SC and ST in the private sector was set up by the government in 2006, which means 13 years before. So far, 8 meetings of coordination committee have been held. In the first coordination committee meeting, it was stated that the best course for achieving progress on the issue of affirmative action is through voluntary action by the industry itself. And apex industry associations, namely Confederation of Indian Industry, CII, Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, FICCI, and Associated Chambers of Commerce and Industry of India, ASSOCHAM, have prepared voluntary code of conduct for their member companies centered around education, employability, entrepreneurship, and employment to achieve inclusion. Then the question is, fine, so what have been these initiatives? Well, there is an appendix, there is an annexure to the response in the Rajya Sabha that says that most of the initiatives identified by ASSOCHAM, CII, and FICCI were about scholarships, vocational training, and that's more true for FICCI, entrepreneurship development programs. Well, this is, for me, a work in progress, and the next step, and hopefully I'll be back sometimes after sometimes with some response. For me, the next step is to open this black box and see what does that mean? What kind of vocational training, what kind of entrepreneurship development programs, and with what results? Because if reservations are quote unquote dying, vanishing because of the policies of the government, because of the shrinking of the state, the private sector has to take over from the public sector, from the state. And of course, that has to be assessed, has to be examined, audited, because figures like these ones cannot be enough. So I will conclude along these lines, just to wrap up, because I have bombarded you with data today, and it may be useful to have bullet points at the end to summarize the argument. The argument is, one, reservations have been a formidable instrument of emancipation for the Dalits for decades. And again, I don't know any country that has been in a position to emancipate so many people in such a bad condition, in such a short span of time, relatively short span of time. Two, reservations paradoxically have contributed to divide Dalits along class and, more importantly, Jati lines. And we see that in the voting pattern that I have shown. And the BJP has been prompt to exploit these divisions by somewhat cashing in on the resentment of the non-dominant Dalit Jatis. This weakening of the Dalits' political stand, and of course, that is illustrated by the decline of BSP, something I could have documented, but you know it, everybody knows it. This weakening is particularly damaging as reservations have already been affected by the shrinking of the state and a process that is now accelerating of privatization. And I repeat that now, for me, the research agenda is more about what do privatizations mean for Dalits and of course for OBCs, for all those who benefit from reservations, and what do the private companies do in that respect, because they'll be probably some of the main players. I mean, they'll be more important players if privatization processes continue and got accelerated. Right, I stop here and I will stop sharing the screen in order to now go to the Q&A.
Christopher, thank you so much for that very interesting data-backed presentation. It was very interesting to look at those numbers, and they were really mind-boggling because you got so many numbers to us today. But I think they provided like the facts to look at, like a mirror to look into the reality of the today's time. Uh, I think what we can discuss is, as we were looking at the data from particularly North India, focused on the Jatav caste, and you referred to some references with Mahars in Maharashtra, and you have been studying this percentage or representations of the MLAs in the different states, and you have written this wonderful book, Rise of Plebeian, about the increased percentage of the OBCs and other jatis in the state assemblies. So, looking at this scenario that you presented today, and vis-a-vis the political movements, you refer to a political movement called BSP. Vis-a-vis in South India, you have Dravidian Party. In Tamil Nadu, they are like the two fractions of the same Dravidian Party, and the domination of the regional parties like in Telangana, in Andhra Pradesh, in Kerala, and now in Maharashtra as well. So, how do you think this regional parties phenomena and this Dravidian political base, at least, does it offer a kind of a pressure to the it's a very long question, but does it offer a kind of check that the BSP used to offer a check in the northern states like Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, and so on and so forth?
Well, you have to look at the social structures of these Dravidian states as different. And again, you need to look at things in some historical perspective. In Tamil Nadu, the Justice Party started to work along these lines 100 years ago. So you have a long tradition of, you can say, political culture of equality, of reservations. No, in 1920 itself, the Justice Party introduces quotas, which make the bureaucracy of the Madras presidency proportionate to the caste structure. So the South is different, and it's different for this reason. It's different also because of the demographics. So in Tamil Nadu, in Madras presidency at least, Brahmins were 3%. They are more than 10% in Uttar Pradesh. So that's another very big difference. And third, the land owning pattern makes a huge difference. There was no zamindari system almost in the South. So the Rayatwari system made it much easier to emancipate from the upper caste domination. All this, plus of course the Dravidian identity. You feel Dravidian instead of feeling a member of one caste group, and you look at the Brahmin as an Aryan invader. That makes a huge difference. Something that, incidentally, Ambedkar tried to reproduce by conversion to Buddhism, saying, you're not part of the Hindu society. And if you are out of the Hindu society, the way the Dravidian could claim that they were out of the Hindu society, then equality is much easier to reach. So for all these reasons, I think the North and the South are really different. But there is one thing that sometimes you find common to both. The divisions along factional lines, along personal lines, along jati lines, among between the jati, the Dalit jatis, is all pervasive. And these divisions, of course, are at their best in Maharashtra. I mean, traditionally, you've had never less than 4 RPIs.
Yeah.
So these divisions remain the main factor politically undermining the political leverage of Dalits, I think.
Priyadashi?
Yeah, thanks, Christopher, for that wonderful presentation. And the presentation was studied with data. It's in some of the categories you mentioned, particularly when you are presenting the paradoxes of reservation. Most of the data were up to 2014. And when we try to see some of the data, either from uh, DOPT, Department of Personnel and Training, at a central level, or at a state level, like from the Department of General Administration, the data is not available. So the question is, I mean, how you are digging into this and sort of what are the chances those who are students, particularly studying this subject, how they will be benefited from the sources of data and so on.
Well, the only way out now is to build your own data. You have to compile the data by yourself. And that's what we do with Ashoka University scholars. We collect data using the who's who's in Vidhan Sabhas, using a list of candidates that the election commission gives. It's very time consuming, but there is no way out. Incidentally, we see now, you can say, similar initiatives among economists. The CMIE is one example. CMIE will become the real source for understanding economic transformations of India, not data coming from the government. NSS is probably, the NSSO, the National Sample Survey Office, is probably less reliable today and less willing to share data than CMIE for sure. And of course, universities are starting to create their own programs for data collection. For instance, the Indian Human Development Survey is not something the Indian government has initiated. It is a joint venture between an American university and an Indian think tank. So this is the future. The future is build your own data sets, collect your own data, and make them available to the public. That's very important.
Related to data, there was a question when you try to present the inclination of Dalits, particularly from rich and above middle, sort of, towards the fundamentalist parties. So when the voting is very secret, what are the ways and means by which this data is collected and collated?
These are data coming from the CSDS Lokniti National Election Survey, NES. And I think they are really robust. Again, an institution, Lokniti, CSDS, that is collecting data for now 40 years. Every election, pre-election polls, post-election polls, and they are really reliable. They are opinion polls, if you want, but these opinion polls are really reliable. No, what the question is not for me. Is it true? The question is why? Why do the richer they are, the more BGP oriented the Jatav's voters are? And the
Yeah.
response is that the class element plays a role. And I would say not only the economic status, but also the attempt at being part of a group, an elite with some Sanskritization behind. You know, the idea that you become a better Hindu by voting BGP. That's Sanskritization in the political domain. And I do think that BGP has been very good at co-opting Dalit leaders
Yes.
in that sense.
Yeah. Within these paradoxes of reservation, you certainly brought out a very important factor of equity. And if you remember, there are with the education being accessed by many small jatis and other subcaste within Dalits, there is a growing assertion and also demand for categorization of reservation. Uh, there were demands in Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, and it was not voted by Supreme Court. How do you see, in order to accommodate what, as a social scientist, social political scientist, how you pursue this?
It's a very tricky issue, and it's a very important issue. You know, we've heard, and recently we've heard from the Supreme Court of India as well, that reservations should go when those who have benefited from reservations have educated their kids in such a way that now they don't need it anymore. Well, it's not as simple as that, because you realize that the stigma remains. Even if you change your class, even if you become a middle class person, you remain a Dalit. So if you lose the reservation, the guarantee that reservation gives, then you may decline again and your kids may be declining again. So the only solution, I think, would be to have quotas within the quota in order to make sure that you do not exclude people who have benefited from the quotas, but you make sure that those who have not benefited, who have never benefited, get access to it. It's complicated, it's tricky, but you know, it has to be done along with another reflection. How many jobs are at stake?
Yeah.
Are we fighting for a handful of jobs? Because once Dalits realize that they are fighting each other for a number of jobs that is shrinking, then they may join hands instead of bickering. So I think these two things should go together. The reform of the system should be preceded by a sustainability program to make sure that it is still meaningful, because it may not be meaningful after many years, after some years. The shrinking of the number of jobs is such that after 10, 15 years, and we don't know where we are today, maybe we are already very low. We don't know. So that's my take on it. The question is, who can orchestrate these debates? Where is the platform? Where is the Dalit platform that everybody can recognize as legitimate for exchange of ideas? So this is even more necessary. I mean, if you have to do things step by step, the very first step is that one. Then fight for the number of jobs, then propose some reform of the system.
Yeah. But you did mention that some of the jatis were more benefited. Whether is it in the proportion to their population and all, that needs to be not to be seen. But is it to the extent of mistreatment and to the extent of stigmatization, they are more into sort of the, into the employment and so on? Do you see that social phenomena into that?
I don't know, really, I don't know. And the question you ask precisely show that we lack data. So what is the percentage of Jatabs in Uttar Pradesh today? We don't know. So we have to go back to the 1931 census that the British had to get some references. It's ridiculous, 100 years old census. The Mandal Commission had to rely on the same census, by the way. So the 52% they came out with, so far as OBCs were concerned, was based on a census that was 80 years old. Public policies should be guided by fresh data. And the caste census that was supposed to take place, that should have taken place in 2011, is now long overdue for making policies meaningful again.
Yeah, Mangesh, and then we will come to privatization. Mangesh,
Christopher, this is the sort of a old argument that has gone into the discussions that you talked about the compulsions of the BJP. Like 20 years back, we were talking about the compulsions of BJP that if they want to come to power, they have to move all different castes, and when they start moving all different castes together, their agenda gets diluted. And now what we are seeing is a very different ball game. And what is happening, in terms of the social movements, particularly when there was a bomb safe, there were social movements all over the places, and they were sort of offering a check to this sort of a consolidation of the BJP politics. Now, this question might be a very big, but I think in this time, do you see that the BJP has overcome those compulsions and of moving the other jatis and staying in the power? And what is happening to the social movements that has gone in the name of Baba Sahib Ambedkar, in terms of Bahujan, in terms of social justice, so on and so forth? So where do you see strategically that if we are having this scenario where political dominance is almost consolidated and India has almost in the hands of the authoritarian regime, but at the same time you can see that the social mobilization is taking place all over the places, north, south, east, west, in terms of like in Rajasthan, the Bharat Bandh of 2nd April and so on and so forth. So as a student of all the social movements and the BJP and the Hindutva nationalist, what can be, what is it that is that that will act as a strategy? I think it's a long question, but
it's a long question. Yeah, I see two questions in fact in this one.
Yeah.
The first is about the BJP strategy, and the second is about the fate of the social movement. I mean, the Dalit social movement. The BJP strategy, I think, has to be seen in a larger perspective. It's the Sangh Parivar's strategy. We have to look at BJP as only the tip of the iceberg. And to my mind, RSS realized that something had to be done to reach out Dalits sometimes in the 70s. And when in 79 they created Seva Bharti, it was part of this. When in 84 they created Bajrang Dal, it was part of it. It was part of this attempt at reaching out Dalits. And they did it, I think, in two ways. One, Sanskritization again, to bring Dalits in the fold of Hinduism. The old tricks, Bojans, something Arya Samaj did 100 years ago with the Shuddhi movement. The same tricks were repeated and worked among those who had not been exposed to Ambedkarism. You look at Uttar Pradesh, Valmikis are a case in point. So that's one strategy. The other strategy was, of course, polarization. You must to feel yourself as a Hindu first. Forget your caste. Or Hindu first. And what is the best way to polarize? To get people united against the Muslim. And we do know that Dalits were instrumentalized by Sangh Parivar to fight Muslims in so many places, including Gujarat 2002, so many places. So these were the two strategies, and they went together. You can call the first one social work, you can call the second one polarization, but together they contributed to a gradual incorporation of Dalits. Plus, of course, the Modi magic, quote unquote, that's a third factor, but that came much later, for the aspiring Dalits, for what Narendra Modi called the neo-middle class. Of course, today, this one is completely gone. But in 2014, 2016, the words were still there. Arun Jaitley was speaking in parliament during the budget session of the neo-middle class, where you have Dalits in this neo-middle class, aspiring. If Modi is the Vikas Purush, if he's the development man, why not for me? So that's another explanation for the way BJP could attract Dalits. Now, your second question, Mangesh, is of course key. Where are the social movements in India today? Where are the trade unions? Where is BAMSAFE? Where are the groups which fought for the workers? Well, I think they've been the collateral casualties of the movement I've just described. Now, if the dominant agenda is polarization, if the dominant idiom is identity, then you forget not only about caste, you forget about class. You're not a worker anymore, you're Hindu first and foremost. And it's true not only in India, it's true everywhere. You know, where are the left, where the leftist movements in Europe, when you have Orban in Hungary, Johnson in UK, this is a global trend. And it goes together with another explanation, that is money. Who has the money? Where are the resources? How can you sustain a party like BSP if you need the candidates to pay for their expenditures? You have to nominate those who can pay for the election campaign. It makes a huge difference vis-a-vis parties which give a lot of money for the campaigns of their candidates. So the resources have been so much concentrated. It goes together with the rise of inequalities. India, and if you go by Piketty's research, is very clear. India is the country where inequalities has increased the most in the world over the last 30 years. So those who are at the bottom of the pyramid and who had social movements were not in a position to resist this flow of money. And the money was not only to pay for expenditures at the time of election campaigns, it was there also for saturating the public sphere, TV channels, holograms, so many things which are so expensive, and you are bombarded on a daily basis by the same messages, the same images. Where is the space for social movements? Even when you demonstrate, you're not in the news. And there were demonstrations, there are demonstrations, there are strikes still, but under the radar. So this is the neoliberal, I would say, dimension of this world.
Actually, you have generated lots of questions. And,
I'm not surprised.
yeah. There are lots of questions for you, and there are just browsing through the questions, like like what are the alternatives to the reservation policy, and if the reservation policy is not effective, what can be the other alternatives to bring this social justice, economic justice, and the political justice into reality?
So, the problem with this question is that you can get rid of reservation when you get rid of caste.
Yes.
So it's a kind of, I would say, the story of the eggs and the chicken, you know.
Yes.
These reservations are supposed to abolish caste eventually. So if you abolish reservations, you will not abolish caste. But of course, reservations should go along with development, the making of a welfare state, the social reform, education, all these should go together. But I don't see any alternative really as effective
as a reservation.
as this system.
Right.
Given the state of society today.
Very
when you look at the US, they have stopped affirmative action for the black. In fact, not de jure, but de facto. Look at the results, you know. Where are the ones who are living in the street, dying of COVID-19, beaten by the police, overrepresented in the jails?
Very true. Priyadarshi?
Yeah, Christophe, in this COVID epidemic, the economy is down everywhere across the world, and most of the states governments are going for privatization. But looking at the fiscal deficit of India, not only of this current financial year but the previous financial year as well, how privatization is really going to bridge the gap of this fiscal deficit?
It will not.
And yeah, I mean, and that's the only solution which is coming from the government, not only from the BJP government, but if you go back, as you mentioned, in UPA 1 and UPA 2, the public-private partnership model was brought in, but we see it's a complete private enterprise. So earlier, there used to be debates and discussions on these issues in the Lok Sabha, but which was again limited to Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. And now, if you see, the Niti Aayog is forwarding list of companies those to be privatized. And in the fifth tranche of economic package, Nirmala Sitharaman said that only one sector or one PSCs or max 4 PSCs will be in each sector, and rest of them will privatize. So how far is really going to be helpful economically to sustain this economy?
It's a desperate move, and it shows that India is indeed the back to the wall. You know, privatizations will not be the solution for many reasons. First of all, many assets, public assets, will not find any taker. And we saw that in the past. These investment plans of the Indian government could never meet the target because they are not effective enough, efficient enough, one. Two, those who make money, the petroleum companies, for instance, will probably be bought by private companies which are already oligopolistic, if not monopolistic. So you will make crony capitalism even bigger, even a bigger problem.
Yes.
So, and of course, thirdly, you will prevent the state from having at its disposal resources for reservations and all the, I would say, implications of a large public system. Not only that, but it will not be enough. It will not be enough because the crisis is of a huge magnitude. The recession, the kind of negative growth rate India is going to be exposed to is unprecedented. SBI, State Bank of India, says -8% in 2021. Never before had India experienced this. It's an earthquake. in a country where there is no social security, there is no safety net, in contrast to other countries, including Europe. So there are two other possibilities where the money can come from. I see two sources only. One, the foreign exchange reserves. India has huge foreign exchange reserves, does not use them yet. Two, in fact, there are three alternatives. Two, taxes. I said just before that inequalities had reached unprecedented levels and unmatched levels in India. You have many super rich Indians in India today. Can they contribute? Maybe in some exceptional manner, but this is the time. And last but not least, to borrow money from elsewhere. It's not a good solution. The debt to GDP ratio of India is already 69%. It's not ideal. Also because to borrow money from foreign countries is a difficult step to make. The rupee is in a bad shape. Hard currencies may increase, but you can alleviate or mitigate this by borrowing money from the World Bank, from the Asian Development Bank, maybe from the IMF. Already, World Bank and ADB have given $3.5 billion. Nobody's mentioned that today, but India has had to do it already.
Yeah, but it's a 1% or 1.5% of what the economic package is being talked about, and it also comes with a condition.
Yeah.
But you have studied the Mandal movement and all very closely, Christophe. Whether there is a possibility to have a larger alliance, if on the basis of fear of job loss, which has been there today, and considering the privatization and crony capitalism.
Yeah, no, of course. Identity politics can be replaced by socio-economic issues. This is the clear alternative. Because who has benefited from the identity politics? Elite groups. And in fact, the overrepresentation of upper caste in the Lok Sabha and the state assemblies is a reflection of that. Now, this is elite revenge. We are seeing the post-Mandal revenge. So some plebeians may realize that they've gone in a direction that is not in their interest. But for that, you have to replace emotions, you have to replace identity by issues, socio-economic issues. And this is the transition that is not easy to make because nobody is allowed to speak in this name. And it's a question of alternative voices. Where do you hear alternative voices? You have really to surf on the net.
Right. Yeah, Mangesh?
Christopher, this was a very interesting discussion and presentation. I think for a lot of students and researchers today, they got the hint of how they can, where to look for the data, how to marshal data to create a picture, a realistic picture of the things there are. And I think it's very important at this stage in the movement to have more data scientists who can, and the social scientists who can come together and really give the kind of clear picture to the society as to where the things are moving and what is happening in the country today. I think this has been a wonderful discussion, and particularly about the strategies that you have spelled out. And we will be very happy to invite you in the future again, because there is so much of data to be exhumed and really analyzed and looked at and get a very clear picture of it, so that
With great pleasure, Mangesh, always.
so the social movement moves forward. And we would conclude here saying thank you to you for a
Thank
very
you.
presentation, and thank you Priyadarshi for having such a lovely lively interactive session. And thank you for the audience. I think I see that on the Facebook there is a overwhelming response, and a lot of you have a lot of questions, and I'm afraid that we cannot take them in one session or two. um, Hold your horses. In the future we will have more opportunities to talk to people, the scholars like Christopher, and you can raise questions. And as they say that questioning is the beginning of something new, we keep on doing it. So thank you so much for listening and joining us today, and we will see you very soon.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Christopher.
Christopher. Thank you, Priyadarshi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.